Well, thank you so much, Andy. And I would invite you to turn with me in your Bible to this passage which we read together just these few moments ago here in the Gospel of John, John's Gospel, chapter 10. And we are going to be looking at this chapter over these 2 Sunday evenings, tonight and next Sunday night. John's Gospel, chapter 10, and verses 1 to 21. My first charge as a minister was in the Northwest Highlands, Ullapool, Lochbroom, and Achiltebui. And in each of the congregations there, I had shepherds, 2 in Ullapool, several in Achiltebui, and almost the whole of the congregation in Lochbroom. And I'll always remember, this was in the early days of my ministry up there, going out to Achiltebui, 30 miles north of Ullapool, most of it on single-track road. And I called to visit Annie and Boise Sinclair, who owned the local shop there, the Achiltebui store. Boise had sheep. They were in a field just opposite the shop. And after sitting and chatting for a while, Boise said to me, "Let's go over and see the sheep." So out we went over the road, and standing, leaning on this gate, into this field which stretched all the way down to the shores of the Minch, Boise said, "Well, there they are. Aren't they wonderful? Aren't they wonderful?" Now, they were sheep. Just sheep. And as far as I was concerned, sheep were the most obtuse, stubborn, and stupid animals in all God's creation. We actually have 2 shepherds in our congregation in Cornerstone, and asking them about this the other Sunday, they both just smiled and nodded their heads in agreement. Indeed, it's been said that it's sheep that disprove the theory of evolution, in that it's impossible for sheep to have evolved. They've simply survived, and only survived because they've had shepherds to look after them. But it was only as I drove home that day, reflecting on what Boise had said, "Aren't they wonderful?" that it dawned on me that he really did love his sheep. And he would do anything for them. Simply anything. Now, it's the voice of Jesus here in this passage who says twice over in verses 11 and 14, our text for these studies, "I am the good shepherd." It's his voice that we need to hear, as he says to us for our comfort and for our reassurance, "Obtuse, stubborn, and stupidly wayward though you be, I love you, and in caring for you, would do anything for you." And it's in the light of this that the Christian believer is then able to say, in the words of Psalm 23, that because the Lord is my shepherd, because this Jesus is my shepherd, I shall not want. No matter what, I shall not want. And how vitally important this is for the living out of our daily Christian lives, having this sense of confidence, we see in the way in which this passage begins, with Jesus saying, verse 1, "Truly, truly, I say to you, The Authorized Version says, "Verily, verily, I say to you." Literally, it's "Amen, amen, I say this to you." And whenever Jesus used this means of introducing what he was about to say, it was his way of underlining, his way of impressing upon us. Now, this is something that you need to pay supreme attention to. It needs to be imprinted in your minds and engraved on your hearts. Simply this: I am your shepherd. I am your shepherd, and you are my sheep. Now, it's this relationship of the shepherd to the sheep and the sheep to the shepherd, picturing the relationship of Christ to the believer and the believer to Christ, that I want us to think on over these 2 Sunday evenings. And so the title, Jesus, the Shepherd and His Sheep, concentrating this evening in verses 1 to 21 on the shepherd, and then next Sunday evening, particularly in verses 27 to 29, on those who are his sheep. And in doing this, the question I want to ask is this: are we able to say with this very real sense of assurance, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want"? Well, let's turn for a little while tonight to think about the shepherd who is set before us here in these verses. And there are 3 things that I want to try and draw out from these verses about him. In that, firstly, there is the identity of the shepherd. Secondly, there is the work of the shepherd. And then thirdly, there is the flock of the shepherd. First of all, the identity of the shepherd. And just to say to you that most of our time will be devoted to this first heading. And the identity of the shepherd, both in terms of his person, who he is, and in terms of his character, what he is like. And so, first of all, this Lord who is our shepherd, who is he? Who is he? In other words, who is Jesus identifying himself with when he says here, "I am the good shepherd"? Well, this imagery is Old Testament, with God pictured as the shepherd of his sheep, to be found in a number of places in its pages. We find it being used, first of all, by Jacob as he lay dying. Genesis 48 and verse 15. Then Jacob blessed Joseph and said, "May the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day." You see, David wasn't the first to say, "The Lord is my shepherd." It was Jacob. Words which David then echoed as he himself was approaching the end of his life. But not only in the 23rd Psalm and the 100th Psalm with which we began our service, know that the Lord, he is God. It is he who made us, and we are his. We are his people and the sheep of his pasture. And Psalm 80, "Give ear, O shepherd of Israel, you who lead Joseph like a flock." And into the prophets, Isaiah 40 and verse 11, "He will tend his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in his arms. He will carry them in his bosom and gently lead those that are with young." And then, as we'll see next Sunday evening, Ezekiel 34, where God promises, verse 15, I myself will be the shepherd of my sheep, and I myself will make them lie down. And we could go on and on and on, but the question is, applied to God in the Old Testament, why is this imagery appropriated by Christ in the New Testament? Well, what Jesus is saying here is the God who is the shepherd of his people. I am that God. Indeed, the very language he uses says this: I am the good shepherd. In that I am is the language of deity. It's God speaking to Moses at the burning bush. I am who I am. Indeed, it was this that so enraged the Jews. If you look on to verse 31, the Jews picked up stones again to stone him. Jesus answered them, I have shown you many good works from the Father. For which of them are you going to stone me? The Jews answered him, it's not for a good work that we are going to stone you, but for blasphemy, because you, being a man, make yourself God. But why did Jesus appropriate this imagery here at this particular point in his ministry? Well, here we need to put this chapter in its context. And it might seem a rather obvious thing to say, but chapter 10 here follows after chapter 9. What I mean by this is that in this chapter, Jesus is still speaking to the people, especially to the Pharisees. Especially to the Pharisees who had witnessed the healing of the congenitally blind man. Chapter 9 and verse 1, as he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. Verse 7, he said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. And the thing is, you see, this infuriated the Pharisees, that Jesus should have done this, particularly on the Sabbath. And they were not only furious at Jesus, they were actually furious at this man who had been healed. And the point is, what had these Pharisees who were meant to be the shepherds of the flock of God, caring for God's people in God's name, what had these Pharisees done to this man? How had they treated him? Well, at the end of verse 34, they cast him out. They threw him out. They excommunicated him, shutting the door on him, because they couldn't have cared less about them. And pointing the finger at them, Jesus said, having brought this man into his sheepfold, truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. You're nothing but thieves and robbers, said Jesus. You're only interested in the sheep so that you might use them to satisfy your own ends. You see, these Pharisees were everything that a pastor shouldn't be. One maybe thinks here of these prosperity evangelists who promise this, that, and the next thing. health and wealth, and all you need to do is to send in your monetary gift. But all they're doing, and it's such an apt phrase, isn't it? All they're doing is fleecing the sheep. But in contrast to the thief and the robber, Jesus says, I am the good. I am the real. I am the true, the genuine shepherd of my people. But in what sense? Well, this brings us to, secondly, this Lord who is our shepherd. What is he like? What is he actually like? What does it mean when Jesus says of himself, I am the good shepherd? And the answer is perfectly good, in contrast to those who were but shepherds in name. Now, the Greek word for good means genuine and true, and it also has the sense of being winsome and attractive. In other words, Jesus is saying here, I'm everything that a true pastor should be. And in these verses, we are told three things about this Jesus who is the good shepherd. Firstly, do you notice, he owns the sheep. That is, the sheep are his. And do you see the way in which this is underlined here? And the picture to have in your mind is that of a communal sheepfold, where in the months of winter, shepherds would bring their sheep to be looked after during the night hours. Verse 1, truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. And when he has brought out all his own, he goes before them. Quite simply, if you are a Christian, you belong to Jesus. You belong to Jesus. You are his. Now, we belong to Jesus because he's purchased us. You remember how Paul puts this in 1 Corinthians 6 and verse 19. You are not your own, for you were bought with a price. But you'll notice here that the emphasis in this chapter is not the purchasing by the Son, but the gifting of the Father. Verse 29, my Father who has given them to me is greater than all. Now, do you remember how Jesus takes up this picture in John 17, his great high priestly prayer, as he prays in verse 9, for those whom you have given me, for they are yours. And it's the picture of God the Father saying to God the Son, now here are my people. Here are my sheep. I want you to look after them. Has someone ever given you something that's altogether precious, saying, will you look after this for me? Well, to God the Father, you're altogether precious. And he has given you to Jesus. He's the Father's gift to Jesus, that he might look after you. But it's not just that Jesus owns the sheep. Do you notice, secondly, it's that he knows the sheep. Directly opposite the church in which I ministered in Ullapool was a field in which there were 2 Highland cows and a small flock of sheep. owned by a member of my congregation. His name was Jackie Bow. And standing chatting to him one day, looking at his sheep, I actually asked him, I think I'd been pondering this chapter, but I actually asked him, Jackie, do you know your sheep? And I'll never forget his reaction. He turned and he looked at me as if I just asked the stupidest question ever. Know my sheep, his look said. Of course I know them. They're mine, aren't they? Now, he didn't actually say that. But what he did do was to proceed to point to each of the sheep in the field in turn and give me biographical details of each of them. And it was really quite extraordinary. See that one over there? A good sheep, had triplets 2 years running. See that one? Got to watch her. She's a real moody so-and-so. That one over there, the number of times she's escaped out onto the hill. That one there, lucky to have her, she was seriously ill, nearly lost her. See that one, hates the dogs. She'll sometimes go for them. And that one, Bella brought that one up in the kitchen when the mother would have nothing to do with her. And on and on and on he went. You see, he knew his sheep. And this is the picture here. And once again, do you notice the contrast? Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens, the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. And when he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. And whenever the Bible speaks of God, of Jesus knowing us by name, it's speaking of how he knows us through and through. Verse 5, a stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. As I stood with Jackie that day, he said to me at one point, try calling them. Try calling them. And he told me what to call. It was something in Gaelic. Can't remember what it was. And I tried to call the sheep. And they just stood there, head down, munching the grass. Tried again, head down, munching the grass. And then he called. And they came running. They came running. And do you notice how Jesus goes on to speak of how intimate and how profound this relationship is? Verse 14, I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. Now listen to this, what Jesus says. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. Now, can you grasp what Jesus is saying? In that there's no other relationship in all of the universe more important, more precious than this. Just as I know the Father and the Father knows me. That's the relationship that I have to my sheep and my sheep have to me. And this knowing of the shepherd isn't meant to be disturbing, is it? It could be. It's meant to be comforting, in that this is the shepherd. Here is the Jesus who knows exactly what we need, and how and where and when to give it. And this is why we're able to say, you see, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. You see, he knows us through and through. But it's not just that Jesus owns the sheep and knows the sheep. Thirdly, do you notice he loves the sheep? And how? Verse 11, I am the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And Jesus says this 3 times for emphasis. Verse 15, just as the Father knows me and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. Verse 17, for this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it up again. It's the fulfillment, isn't it, of Isaiah 53 and verse 6. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way. It's the description of man in his sin, turning away from God in order to go his own way and do his own thing. The picture which Jesus fleshes out in Luke 15 and the parable of the lost sheep, which underlines what? Well, one sheep lost out of 100. So what? So what? That's not such a bad loss, just 1%. But no, the shepherd searches and searches and searches. No price is too great to get it back. And so it is with Jesus, our good shepherd. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. How did Jesus himself put it in Matthew 26? Quoting Zechariah 13, I will strike the shepherd. Now that would be bad news for the sheep, because kill the shepherd and the sheep have no hope. But in the economy of the gospel, strike Jesus the shepherd, and the sheep come to have life. Paul puts it this way in Romans 8 and 32, he who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all. And this is the basis of our confidence in daily living. How will he not also graciously give us all things, all that we could ever need? And again, it's why we're able to say, with this Lord who is my shepherd, who owns me and knows me and loves me, I shall not be in want. Now that's the identity of the shepherd. Secondly, the work of the shepherd, much, much more briefly. And at verse 7, do you notice that the image changes? So Jesus again said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. And the picture now is that of the summer months when the shepherd would be out on the hills with his sheep. And when it came to night, he would create a temporary sheepfold with branches and with briars. It's George Campbell Morgan, Martin Lloyd-Jones' predecessor at Westminster Chapel in London, who tells of meeting George Adam Smith, the former Free Church minister and professor of Old Testament at the Free Church College, and of how Adam Smith told him that he was out walking somewhere in the Middle East and he met a shepherd with his sheep, and falling into conversation with this shepherd about his sheep, the shepherd took him to see the sheepfold where he put them at night. And this is where the sheep go at night, George Adam Smith asked, somewhat perplexed. Yes, the shepherd replied, and they're perfectly safe. Perfectly safe, said George Adam Smith, looking at it, but there's no door. To which the shepherd replied, now he wasn't a Christian. He didn't have a knowledge of the Gospels or John 10. But this shepherd said, as if stating the obvious, but I am the door. I'm the door. And the picture of the shepherd in this imagery is a twofold one. In that it's that of the shepherd protecting. With him as the door, the sheep are safe from the wolf and every sort of predator. And not just protecting, providing. You see, the sheep are brought in to be safe, and then they're taken out to be fed. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved. He will be safe, and will go in and out and find pasture. And again, it's the 23rd Psalm, isn't it? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And bringing us out, he makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. It's the picture here, not just of being safe, and we'll say more about this next time, but of being satisfied in the care of the shepherd. Verse 10, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. And so this is the work of the Good Shepherd in our lives, protecting and providing. And if you want to know a bit more about this in the 23rd Psalm, go on to the Cornerstone website and look for the sermon on the 10th of July on the 23rd Psalm, preached by John Rushton. And you'll see it all unfolded there. Well, our time is gone. The identity of the shepherd, the work of the shepherd, and in a word, the flock of the shepherd. And I'll say more about this next time, but verse 16, I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. Now is this you? Is Jesus calling you to be part of his flock? Well, if he is, you need to come in. And here's the way in, verse 9. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved. You see, Jesus is making an exclusive claim. I am the door. That is, there is no other way into the eternal safety of God's sheepfold. And Jesus just isn't making an exclusive claim. He's also extending an exclusive claim. He's also extending an inclusive invite. I am the door, if anyone. And he really does mean anyone. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved. You see, what a thing it is to be a Christian, to have Jesus as your shepherd. In the words of this old hymn about the shepherd, and I wonder if you're able to say this, I have a shepherd, one I love so well. How he has blessed me, tongue can never tell. On the cross he suffered, shed his blood and died, that I might forever in his love abide. Well, it's to the cross that we come now as we approach the Lord's table. And as we do this, we're going to sing together, what gift of grace is Jesus, my Redeemer? There is no more for heaven now to give. He is my joy, my righteousness and freedom, my steadfast love, my deep and boundless